Okay, so as I was telling you, scheduled, commercial banks have now the freedom to set the interest rates on their own deposits, so subjected, okay, to minimum. So there has to be some floor rates. So subjected to minimum floor rates. So that has to be done. Okay, and there has to be a floor rate that this much is the minimum and the maximum of rates. So floor rates and maximum ceiling rates. Okay, now the the interesting part is that the interest rate on domestic banks, domestic term deposits. So term deposits have been decontrolled. So that is very important. Has been decontrolled. Okay, so it has been decontrolled. And let me continue writing some more important relevant points. Okay. Now the prime lending rate of SBI and other banks on general advances of over 2 lakhs has been reduced. Okay, and also the rate of interest on deposits and advances of all cooperative banks have been deregulated, subject to a minimum lending rate of 13%. Okay, we'll come to the next one. Okay, the fifth point or the fifth recommendation taken by the government of India is how do we recover the debts. Okay, so the recovery of debt. So if you remember, they had created a separate body. So this is very important point. So the government of India passed the recovery of debts due to banks and financial institutions Act 1993. So this is very important. Now, in order to facilitate and speed up the recovery of debts, so there are 6 special recovery tribunals have been set up. Okay, and one appellate. So one is already set up in Mumbai. So one appellate tribunal main, that is set up in Mumbai. So this is very important. Okay, coming to the next recommendation. Yes, the 6th one, that is competition from private sector banks. Okay, so first is in this, banking is now open to private sector. So banking is open to the private sector. Second, new private sector banks have already started functioning. Now these private sector, so these banks, okay, are allowed to raise capital. So very important point, this is capital contribution from, so they can take loans or any investment from the foreign institutional investors up to 20%, and from NRIs they can take 40%. So this, because of this, what has happened, this, there's so much of investment can be taken from outside world, and that is why the competition has increased. Okay, coming to the seventh point. Okay, so the seventh point is access to capital market. Okay, so the banking companies, that is, at the time of acquisition and transfer of undertakings Act. So this is an act, was created, was amended. And why was it amended? To enable the banks to raise capital through public issues. Now this is subject to the provision that the holding of central government would not fall. So the contribution of government holding should be 51%. So it should not be below 51% of paid up capital. Okay. So now, as through this, SBI has raised a lot of substantial amounts of funds through equity and bonds. Okay, the next point we'll go is quickly is freedom of operation. Okay, so yes, the 8th point, freedom of operation. So they are allowed to open new branches, okay, and upgrade also, extension counters, okay. Now these things they can do only after they attain the capital adequacy ratio, and as I said, prudential norms they have to follow, okay. Okay, and they are also permitted to close the non-functioning banks which are not functioning in rural banks, that also they can close down. Okay, coming to the next 9th recommendation, that is local area banks. Now there's a short form for this, LABs. Now there's a story behind this. In 1996, RBI issued guidelines for setting up LABs, okay, and it gave its approval for setting up. So this is very important. So there were 7 LABs in private sector. So what are the use of LABs? Just let me write down. Let me clear this. So LABs in private sector will help in mobilizing rural savings and in channeling them into investment in local area. So that is the advantage of LABs. Okay, the 10th one. So the 10th one is supervision. Yes, that is also was one of the recommendation of Narasimham committee. So supervision of commercial banks. Okay. So the RBI set up a board. So RBI set up a board of financial supervision, and they had an advisory council also. So with an advisory council, okay, and financial. So now in 1993 what happened? RBI, established a new department. So established a new department, okay, and this was known as the Department of Supervision. Yes, I repeat, the Department of Supervision. It was an independent unit for the purpose was for mainly was made for supervision of commercial banks. Okay, so now this was the Narasimham Committee Report 1, and now let us talk about the Narasimham Committee Report 2, that was again done in 1998. Okay, so let me just clear this. Yes, so now I will talk about is Narasimham Committee Report 2, and this was done in 1998. So in 1998, the government appointed yet another committee under the chairmanship of Mr. Narasimham, and it is also known as the Banking Sector Committee. So let me write that down. It is also known as the Banking Sector Committee. And what was it? What was the main mission? It was told to review the banking reform progress and design a program which is going to further strengthen the financial system of India. So the committee generally focused on many parameters here. So let us see. So the committee focused on various areas such as capital adequacy, bank mergers, bank legislation, etc. Okay, and then finally it submitted its report. So submitted its report to the government in 1998 with various kinds of again recommendations. Yes, so we will go with one by one, and you remember these points of strengthening the bank. So let us see. Okay, so the first one was, as I said, strengthening banks in India. Okay, so what the committee thought, that they consider that if there is a stronger banking system in context of the current account convertibility, that is CAC, so it thought that Indian banks are capable of handling problems regarding the domestic liquidity, and so that is why the merger of strong banks which will have, so if two banks are, suppose if one bank is having a problem, the another bank can suffice the problem. So that is why merging is very, very important. Okay, so what did it recommend? It recommended the merger of, that is what is happening with Bank of Baroda and Vijay Bank, and Dena Bank. So all three banks are merged. So any problem of liquidation, each the other bank will take care of the other bank. Okay, so say for one bank is in profit and the other bank is in loss, so that will be minimized, and that is why merging is so important. What is merging? Coming together, joining hands. Okay, so it recommends the merger of strong banks which will have a multiplier. So what I said, multiply, profits will increase, losses will also be divided. So multiplier effect on the industry. The second recommendation they said is narrow banking. Okay, now those days, public sector banks, they were facing a lot of problems with NPAs. Okay, so some of them were as high, so the non-performing assets were more than 20% also. Okay, so that is why they wanted to have such a narrow banking concept where weak banks will be allowed to place their funds only in short term and risk-free assets. So let me write down here. So for successful rehabilitation of these NPA bank, that is non-performing assets banks, narrow banking concept was created where weak banks will be allowed to place their funds only in the short term. Okay, only in short term and risk free assets. Okay, coming to the third recommendation, let me see. Okay, so the third recommendation was capital adequacy ratio. Okay, so in order to improve the total strength of Indian banking system, so the committee they thought like complete increase of the banking, they further the bank should be strengthened. So they recommended the government should raise, okay, so the government should raise the prescribed whatever they require, whatever capital they require. So the prescribed capital adequacy norms. So there must be a rule for this, and what will happen? So this will further improve their absorption capacity also. Okay, so now currently let me give you the current statistics. So currently the capital adequacy ratio for Indian banks is at 9%. Okay, let us come to the next one.